welcome back to my channel. I'm Erica and I am really excited to do this video and the next one. We are going to be getting ready for Halloween, and if you have been around here for a while, you may remember that last year I did Belle for me and we got a Beast costume for my husband. I did not have time to make that, so this year we really wanted to do something together that I could make mine and his. I really want to get into more men's costuming as well because my husband and I have a ton of fun doing those together, and I want to have fun not just making mine but also making his as well. So this year we are doing Buttercup and Westley from The Princess Bride. So I had not watched that before we started dating, and he introduced it to me while we were dating, and I might bring it up every once in a while, but I grew up in a conservative religious cult and I didn't escape until I was a young adult, and so I had never been introduced to that type of thing and I thought it was dumb, to be completely honest. However, over the last few years I have learned to appreciate the humor and the ridiculousness of the movie, and we introduced it to our kids this last year and they all fell in love with it. I'm very happy to say that even my 13-year-old son, who's all into superheroes, also fell in love with it. So we are going to have a little bit of fun. We found somewhere that I could get the fabric for Buttercup's red dress and then for Wesley's Dread Pirate Roberts costume. So I'm going to be doing my costume in the first one and his costume in the second video leading up to Halloween. So the other projects are going to take a break for this month. We have so much fun with Halloween. I was not allowed to celebrate Halloween growing up, and this has just been so much fun. We have a blast, and we have many plans for the future of us doing costumes together. So this is just really gonna be the start. I was really bummed last year that I didn't have time to make the Beast costume for my husband. So this year I was like, we're going to make the time because I want to make my costume, but I also want to make yours. And also, pardon my throat, I'm actually just happy this video is going to be going up because 3 of my kids got sick over the last week and I barely had time to do anything, and then I got sick. Thankfully not all 5 of them got sick, but the twins were, and they're only 4, and it was just a lot of coughing and they needed mama, so sewing took a break. That's the realness of this. So anyway, for Buttercup's red dress, I found this red linen at a discount place. I'm really excited because it actually made it affordable. So it was like $7 a yard, I think, which is a really good price for linen. I don't typically pay that much for fabric, but for linen, I did. I got also some black linen for Wesley's shirt for my husband, and then some, I'll have to go dig it up for next week's video for his pants. I haven't made his costume yet. I've just finished mine. I also found this red cord for the lacing on Buttercup's sleeves, and then this for the lacing in the back of Buttercup's dress. And then I have not actually completed the belt yet, but it will be in this video, I think. Either that or it will be in the final reveal. But this gold ribbon I'm going to turn into her belt for it. So my plan is, because it's not very thick, to double it over to make it thick for the belt, and I have some extra gold beads that I might go in by hand and make it more cohesive as a belt. For the pattern, I will say we waited long enough to make this decision that I didn't have time to, especially when the twins got sick, that I didn't have time to like make my own pattern for Buttercup's dress. So I did scour the web and I found one by Daisy Victoria, who is another costuber, and so I'll be giving my thoughts on this pattern too. It got me the dress and I'm really happy about that. So I'm glad that it was available. Next time I'm gonna try to do this in time to just make my own, but it did what I needed it to do. So I'm really excited. I just finished her dress last night and I cannot wait to get through this process. Yeah, so let's start on the dress and can't wait to show it to you at the end. The first thing to do was I washed and ironed the fabric before this, and then I had to come back later and cut it. And so the first thing I did was cut out all of the skirt panels. There were 6 of them. And then for the rest of the dress, I did go ahead and cut out everything. But then I sewed the skirt first. And I did that with French seams. So it's just sewing wrong sides together in a 1/4 inch seam, trimming it down to an 8-inch seam, ironing it out, turning it the other way, ironing it down, and then sewing another 1/4 inch seam. There's plenty of tutorials on the web. I do think I show a little bit of it, but that's the basics of a French seam. So I did that for all 6 seams for the skirt, leaving a few inch gap at the back for the closure, which I then hemmed up. For sewing the skirt panels together, the instructions did say to sew one on the straight grain with the skirts are cut so one side of it is on the straight grain and one side of it is on the bias. So you match a bias seam with a straight seam, and that will help the skirt keep its structure so it doesn't stretch out later. Prior to this, I had done a mock-up of just the bodice portion, and I had to add some length and a little bit of width to it. It comes in one size for the pattern, which I'm going to be honest, this is from a standpoint of someone that I usually just go off a picture and make my own patterns. So I'm sure if you can't do that, this would be extremely helpful. But it was only one size, which I know there are a lot of patterns out there that you only purchase one size in the pattern, but I felt like this one was a little pricey for the fact that it wasn't graded for multiple sizes. Also, the outside lines for the pattern were really, really thick, which I don't like at all. It doesn't make it as easy for me to line up the pieces. It works a lot better if the lines on the pattern are very thin. So I think at this point we have jumped to the bodice, and it's the side seams and the shoulder seams, which again I did in French seams. I did a French seam wherever I could in this. I probably could have done it in a couple other places too, but linen frays very easily, and I want this dress to be very sturdy and not have any fraying. So the shoulder seams were a little bit trickier to do the French seam because there's a sharp curve, or more like a corner, inverted corner on it, but it worked fine. So I'm just showing that right here and how pretty that looks on the outside. And then once you have that last 1/4 inch seam, you just go back and iron it down again, and it just looks so amazing. So here I'm jumping to pleating the bottom of the bodice, and then those pleats will match a couple of the pleats on the skirt later. Now these pins ended up staying in here for a while. I didn't actually sew up these pleats for quite a while. For the center front seam, I did not do a French seam on that one. I just did a regular seam, and I'll show in a minute that I felled each of the raw edges to each side. As pretty as French seams are, it does put all the bulk on one side of a seam, and since this is the front, I cannot talk right now, since this was the center front of the dress, I didn't want that bulk to be on either one side of it, so I wanted it evenly spaced on both sides of the seam. So here I'm just rolling it up and pinning it, which I didn't actually sew until I then grabbed the facing pieces, sewed those together, hemmed up one edge of it, and then sewed that to the front of the bodice with right sides together and turned it in. And then I hand stitched those seams down. So here you can see where the pins end is where the facing stops being stitched down, and I did not stitch that at all. I didn't want anything that would look like stitching on the front, and with the eyelets holding the facing down the back of the dress, it really doesn't need anything past where I do that part by hand. So here I'm just showing where I got to the V, stitched all the facing down and the seams. So hopping back to the skirt, here's where I finally sewed up those pleats, matched the pleats with pleats on the skirt, matched up the back openings, and then pleated in the rest of the excess of the skirt to match the width of the waist on the bodice, and sewed it all together. So for the sleeves, which is what I'm working on here, again, I did a French seam down the seam of the sleeve, the long seam, and then here it said use some plaid ribbon to line the bottom, the bell portion of the sleeve toward the wrist. I didn't have any plaid ribbon, so I had an old men's shirt that I had gotten at a thrift store a while ago for the fabric that I really liked, and I just cut a couple of strips off of that, ironed down one side of it, sewed it down as I just showed, folded it over, and then came back and did a row of stitching to hold it down at the top. And I was totally okay with this row of stitching because this entire section of the sleeve is going to be cartridge pleated up, and you're going to barely be able to see anything. And I was going for quickness. My thread matches nearly perfectly, and then here I'm going to show that that's how I did the opening on the sleeve. I did a double turn and turn hem there on the opening. That's also how I did the opening on the skirt as well. Anyway, I was fine with the stitching. So these are the modesty panels for the wrists and the back where the lacing will go. So that's just folded over, stitched down on the three sides with an opening left for me to turn it right side out. I clipped the corners, turned it right side out, ironed it out, and then I top stitched all around them because I like the look of top stitching and it holds it down. And I used my little handy chopstick to push out all the corners before I pressed it down. This was a very big hem, so I didn't show much of it, but I did a turn and turn hem just about as narrow as I could handle with my fingers, doing it quickly. And then for the eyelets. Now the pattern has metal eyelets that she punched through, which she then said that to be more screen accurate, you could cover them in red. So I just went more screen accurate to begin with and used my treadle machine with my buttonholer and did the eyelets that way, and I absolutely love how they turned out. And then I punched out the middle. I'm so excited. This is the first time I've gotten to use my eyelet cam for my buttonholer. We bought that separately but this is so fun. I never need an excuse to use my treadle machine. Once the eyelets were complete, I brought them over here and threaded all of the threads on the front, moved them to the back, and trimmed them on the back. That way we wouldn't have a bunch of loose threads on the front. Once the eyelets were all complete, I sewed down the modesty panel so that the seam was on the inside of the eyelet holes so that the lacing could work on the dress. I really can't talk right now. And then marked the sleeve for the cartridge pleats. So these marks are every 7/8 of an inch. I wanted the knot to be hidden on the inside, and then start the first stitching coming up from the front toward the back and then back down, and then you just do that all the way down for the first row, and then an identical down on another row below it to pull them up for the cartridges in a bit. So you should end with 2 rows of identical stitches, and then come to each of the ends here that I left hanging and pull them up, and then just go all the way down the sleeve that way. I had to do this in 4 sections because this was a very big sleeve. Then you just make sure that it is pleated down to the size you want to match the size of the cuff, and then put the cuff up against, oh wait, first I'm tying off the threads, that way it does not come undone, and I will weave these threads in later and hide them. Then you put the cuff so that the outside, the right side is facing up against the tips of these pleats, and then whip stitch at the inside of the pleat. I am not explaining this very well. There are so many tutorials, but hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. And then once you get all the way down, knot off the thread, and you have it attached. And then it's just lacing up the sleeve cuffs and lacing up the back. I have these yarn needles that I use to make this process just a lot easier. I also used a lighter to burn the ends of the ribbon and the squirting so that it will not fray.